Hi, welcome to Row and Hoe Gardening with Alfred Hall. My name is Ryan Young. I'm the Assistant Director of Regional Advancement at Miami Regionals. And it is my honor to introduce our speakers today, as well as welcome you all to join us for this Murals presentation. Mural stands for Miami University Regionals, Alumni, and Students. And we are here to engage the alumni of Miami Regionals, as well as all Miami alums. We are doing this in conjunction with the Miami University Alumni Association. They are our partner on this. And I am here to introduce Alfred Hall, our speaker for the day. Alfred is a certified square foot gardener, a practicing urban farmer, and a much sought after guest speaker at gardening, arts, and cultural events throughout Butler County, Ohio. After a 3-decade international career in quality assurance, he retired to his hometown of Hamilton. As a co-founder of the nonprofit Hamilton Urban Garden Systems, or HUGS organization, since 2012, he has been growing, processing, and distributing organically local grown food, educating the citizens of Butler County on the health benefits of sustainable local food system, and providing free community garden plots to Hamilton City residents, and donating fresh produce to local food pantries and community meal centers. After retiring from HUGS in 2020, he began growing organic produce for New Life Mission, a local community meal center and food pantry. In the spring of 2021, he will expand and produce a garden at NLM and co-lead a public-private partnership initiative that is installing a 9,000 square foot pollinator garden on city-owned vacant lots on South 4th Street in Hamilton, Ohio. Before I introduce Alfred and turn the reins over, I want to remind everyone that questions are available at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can leave a question for Alfred, and we will try and address the question near the end of the presentation. So thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I pass it over to our star presenter, Alfred Hall.
Good afternoon. I am Alfred, and we'll be talking about one type of backyard gardening that can be done in urban areas as well as rural gardening, which is the same concept, usually on a slightly larger scale. But before I go into row and hoe gardening, I just want to make everyone aware that there are many types of backyard gardening, from containers or raised boxes to fabric grow bags to straw bales to pallets. One of my favorites, Three Sister Gardening, and others. And these are some links where you can find out a little bit more about those particular types of gardening. So row and hoe gardening. There's some general points that I think are very important for you to consider before you ever put a seed in the ground. First and foremost is you need to plan your garden. What are you going to plant? How many you're going to plant? Where you're going to plant your garden? And how much time, and for that matter, money, do you want to spend gardening? I've killed a lot of plants over the years. I've also grown a lot of plants over the years. But most of the failures I've had was I just didn't do proper planning. If you only have 2 or 3 hours a week to work in a garden, then your garden size is going to be different than if you're retired like me and spend 40 to 60 hours a week in the garden. So planning your garden is extremely important. The other thing that people do is they grow too many. A tomato plant, according to whether it's cherry, Roma, or slicer, will give you anywhere between 12 and 20 pounds of tomatoes over the season. If there's 2 or 4 of you and you grow 20 tomato plants, I would think that you're growing too many. So you really have to determine and understand what you like to eat and how much you really need to grow in order to grow for yourself, give some away, and maybe preserve some for later season use. Plant what you like to eat. If you don't like eggplant and you don't know anyone that you're going to give it away to, then don't plant it. So plant what you really like to eat. I always recommend that you start small, according to the type of gardening that you choose to do. A 10 by 10 plot will give you a lot of vegetables and herbs. 10 by 20 is more than enough for a family of four. So start small and start with things that are easy to grow. Tomatoes, peppers, greens are pretty easy to grow. So I would recommend that you start small and start with things that do not take a lot of time and attention to grow successfully. It does take time and effort to garden. It's more than just putting a seed in the ground and watching it grow. So you have to be prepared to spend some time and effort to have a successful garden. You will have failures. I've had failures, but you'll have more success than you have failures. So try it. It's really a great way to have the best tasting vegetables and herbs that you've ever had. And like I say, you will have disappointments. And don't forget that you're outside and you're in the sun. I wear a sun hat. I take a break in the shade every now and then, and I drink plenty of water. You're doing row and hoe gardening, so you'll have some tools that are sharp and heavy. So you have to be sure that you take caution when you're using those tools, and take caution that you drink enough water and don't get sunstroke. I've had that happen too. When I plan my garden, I use an Excel spreadsheet. There are some good gardening applications out there. Seed Saver Exchange has a very good application where you tell them what you want to grow, and they, on their application, will space everything for you properly. They do all the work for you. I got in the habit of using Excel spreadsheets because I'd had somebody call me up and say, I want to do a garden. I have this much space. This is what I want to grow. Can you help me out? So this happens to be a 20 by 24 garden. And what these people wanted to grow in this garden was tomatoes, beans, cucumbers. That's all they wanted to grow. But they had a family of 6. So what I did was I put together a plan for them in an Excel spreadsheet. I always show where north is because you plant your highest plants to the north side. We're in the northern hemisphere. The sun sinks in the southwest. So if you plant your plants that are tallest on the north side, then you get the least amount of shade on your other plants. Everything that they needed to know: how many to plant, how far apart to plant them, how far apart between rows they should be, whether they need a trellis, if it's succession planting where you can plant some, then plant some more, and then plant some more, so you have it all summer long. It's all on this one piece of paper. And I think I have 10 tomatoes, 38 bush beans per row, cucumbers. I don't know what they were going to do. I think they said they were going to pickle a lot of cucumbers. But it tells you within row, between rows, do I need to trellis? If I'm going to plant more than one crop, when do I plant, et cetera, et cetera? Do I direct sow? Can I use a transplant? Or all on that one piece of paper? So plan your garden out. And this just happens to be a couple more examples of Excel spreadsheets I did for people that wanted to grow some eggplant, some cucumbers, some bush beans, some summer squash, and some watermelons on the top one. And the bottom one looks like I got tomatoes, peas, bush beans, cucumbers, carrots, sweet peppers, leaf lettuce, and onions. So it's just a plan according to the space you have to grow in, the time you have to spend planting and tending and harvesting it, and what you like to eat. So plan your garden out. Of course, you have to have seeds or plants, sun, water, and healthy soil. If you have those things, you can be successful gardening anywhere. Follow the directions on the seed pack when planting. I can't emphasize enough that the instructions on the seed packet, if you follow them, will greatly enhance your ability to successfully grow and harvest vegetables and herbs. And if you're doing row and hoe gardening, you are going to need some tools and equipment, and you are going to sweat. The thing about gardening is if a tomato is ready to harvest or beans are ready to pick, then it has to be done, whether it's 95 or 100 degrees out or whether it's raining out, really doesn't matter. You can't wait a week because you lose the best tasting and most nutritious elements of the vegetable that you grow if you don't harvest it when it's supposed to be harvested. You're going to need to weed, control disease and pest, hoe, water, harvest. And if you do succession planting so that you have the same produce or different produce throughout the whole year planted in the same spot, then you're going to need to understand how to do that kind of succession planting. Again, sun, water, healthy soil, follow the seed directs, make sure your equipment's in good working shape. And once you plant it, you just can't walk away and forget it. You got to take care of it. I tend to buy organic seeds. That's your preference. If you don't want to grow organic, you don't have to. I do, so I tend to buy organic seed. You can either grow your own seedlings or you can purchase them. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but if you can't see this, scream at me and I'll put it away. But I just bought a 72 cell seed starter tray with a dome on it. And I'm getting ready now to start my tomatoes and my peppers for planting and selling to raise funds for my garden this week. So you can grow your own seedlings or you can purchase them. And be patient. A lot of times, I was guilty myself of it. The seed packet will say, start tomatoes 6 to 8 weeks before you plant them in the ground. Well, I don't plant them in the ground until June 1st because the soil's not warm enough yet. So I'm not going to start my tomatoes, although I have in the past, in February, because by the time I go to plant them, they're all leggy and they're not as healthy as they should be. So be patient to put the seed in before you plant. Make sure you understand how long you need to have it grow indoors if you're going to do that before you transplant it outside, or if you're going to direct sow, make sure you follow the timelines on direct sowing also, because a lot of people plant way too many and plant way too early, or they put them out in the garden before the danger of the last frost is over. And I always tell people, you can buy my plants from me now, but if you put them in the ground, I'll see you again because you're going to be coming back and buying more because the frost will kill them. This particular part of the country, although it's been getting warmer, it seems every year, I don't really plant any of my summer crops, my peppers, tomatoes, those kinds of things, the things that won't stand a frost until after May 15th. May 15th usually is a good date that you're not going to see a frost after that. And if you store your seeds out of the sun and heat, they will last longer. Some seeds will last 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years, according to the way you store them. In this area, Couch's Market in New Miami is a very good place to buy seeds and plants from, as is Al Joe's on the west side of Hamilton. Those are the two places local I buy my seeds and my plants from. I buy most of my seeds from either High Mowing Organic Seed, which is out of Vermont, or from Seed Savers Exchange, and they're both online. So you need seeds and plants. Sun. Most plants require a minimum of 6 hours a day of sun. 8 is better. However, some plants will not grow well in heat or in the direct sunlight. Those kind of plants, you're either going to have a shade cloth around, or you're going to plant them only in the spring and then again in the fall. For instance, radishes grow well in the spring. Plant them in the spring, 28 days later, they're ready to pull up, and then you can plant another crop. Sometimes, according to when you plant them, and things like radishes and scallions and carrots, lettuce, spinach can be planted as soon as the soil can be worked, even if you're going to get another frost. Other things, you can't. You have to wait until the last danger of frost is over. Like I said, you can use shade cloth for cool weather crops. And always plant your taller plants to the north. Again, I told you we live in the northern hemisphere, and the sun sets to the southwest. So to minimize your shade, plant your tallest plants to the north of the garden. Unless you're going to also be growing plants that need some shade, and then you can plant them in front of plants that grow tall, and that will supply those plants with some amount of shade to keep them out of direct sunlight for part of the day. So seeds and plants and sun. Water. Excuse me. If you have a way to collect rainwater, you should. Rainwater is the best kind of water for your plants. If you don't have a way to collect rainwater and you use tap water, I always let it set for 24 hours. I do that for 2 reasons. I take 5-gallon buckets, I set them by my garden rows, and I water my plants right at where the stem goes into the ground. I try to keep my leaves dry, and by letting it set for 24 hours, and you use tap water, let it set for 24 hours. That'll allow the sun to warm it up so you don't shock your plants with too cold of water, and it'll help some of the chemicals, if there's any in there, dissolve out. Drip irrigation, water-saving techniques are very good to use. I water right at the roots of my plants simply because by keeping the water off the leaves, I minimize the risk of fungus and mildew. And I water in the early morning before the sun comes up so that it can seep down into the ground. But that if I do get leaves wet, the sun's going to dry that water off of the leaves. The correct amount of water, if your soil is moist down to your second knuckle, which is about 2 inches on everybody's hand, if it's moist that deep into the ground, then you have enough water. If your plants look wilty, they probably need water. And if you think about it, when you're outside in 95 degrees weather, you're thirstier than you are in 70-degree weather. So plants are the same way. If they look wilty, they probably need a drink of water. If they look yellowish, a lot of times that can be just because you're putting too much water on them. And the last thing about watering is water consistently. One of the biggest reasons that tomatoes crack is people water, then they water the next day, then they don't water for 3 days, and then they water a day, and then they wait 4 days. Set up a water schedule that you water every other day or every 3 days, whatever you set up. And then unless the weather dramatically changes with a lot of rain or a large amount of heat, stick to that schedule that you set up, and you'll be much better off than not watering consistently. Enrot on tomatoes and peppers sometimes is not only caused by a chemical deficiency in the soil, but is also caused by inconsistent watering. So water consistently. Healthy soil. Generally, for most things that you grow, if your soil pH is between 6.2 to 6.5 to 7 to 7.2, you'll be okay. There are some plants that like the soil to be more acidic than that. There's some plants that like it to be more alkaline than that. But most plants, 6.5 to 7, 6.2 to 7.2, and you'll be okay. And there are ways to measure your pH. I've given you a little slide up there at the top. They're easy to read. There are also some do-it-yourself DIY pH methods out there that you can use. And they're simple, and they'll give you more right than wrong, and that's really all that you need. You just need to be more right than wrong when you come to pH. Sulfur lowers pH. And lime raises pH. And I've given you another slide there on the side, and you can look up online and it'll tell you how many pounds or portions of a pound you need to raise your pH or lower your pH by X amount. Organic matter is very important to healthy soil. Worms and soil micronutrients are just as vital as phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen, and you have to have healthy soil. If you can, you should compost. I use a 3-bin method. I put my greens and browns in the first bin, keep it moist, not wet. I turn it once a week, and after a couple, 2 or 3 weeks, I throw it into the second bin, keep it moist, wet, turn it a few times, throw it into the last bin. And after about a month and a half, you'll have some good compost you can put right on your plants. I also throw worms in my compost bin. They help the decomposition of the organic material. And the compost works really, really well in gardens. It helps break down clay. It puts the micronutrients in the soil you need, as well as the primary nutrients you need in the soil to grow healthy vegetables and herbs. Follow the directions on the seed pack. I'm going to say this 2 or 3 times. Hopefully I'm still here and you can hear me. The planting depth, the plant spacing, the height and breadth of your plants at maturity, how much sun they need, water, how much space between your rows you should have, how long it's going to take before your seeds germinate and start to pop through the soil, and how long it should be before you're ready to harvest are all on that seed package. And they're all key to growing healthy, productive plants. They are on the seed packet or a plant marker. If you happen to buy plants at a store, you'll get all the information you need in order to grow those. This is an example. They use different techniques. There's no one technique, but as you can see, it shows you sun. It shows you how deep to plant them, how far apart to plant them, how long it takes to get them to maturity. So everything that you need to know about whatever it is you're planting is on that seed packet. Follow it. So sun, soil, water, seeds, all those things are important. And it's also very important to remember that if you do row and hoe gardening, you're going to have to use some muscle power, and you're going to have to use some tools and equipment to keep your garden not only looking good, but keeping it healthy and free of disease and pests, and getting the best harvest that you can get. If you look up on the internet, there's also a couple books out. One by Mel Bartholomew called Improved Square Foot Gardening. And there's others that'll tell you if you're going to plant seeds indoors, how long you should plant them indoors before you transfer them outdoors, and then where they should, when they're planted outdoors, what time of the year they should be based on the temperate zone you live in. We live in temperate zone 6, and our growing season goes from around May 15th to October 15th. Although, as I said, it seems to be getting warmer earlier and staying warmer later. But 6 months of growing season is a really good barometer you can use for planting. And based on the kind of vegetable or herb you're going to grow, will determine how many weeks you're going to start seeds before you set them out, and then when you should start growing them inside, and when it's a safe time to plant them outside. And these are just a couple charts that show you different types of vegetables and when you should plant them indoors and when you should plant them outdoors. You can find this on the internet for free. There's lots of charts and graphs on all different kinds of vegetables and herbs and flowers, for that matter, that you can plant and when you should plant them. And most of them are very simple to read, like these two. All right, so you've got your transplants of your seeds and you're going to plant them. Plant spacing and row spacing is extremely important. They're important because your plants are going to get wider and taller as they grow, and they need airflow. Airflow helps keep mold, mildew, fungus disease down. So the spacing within your row and between rows is extremely important. Different vegetables, different spacing. Cucumbers, if you trellis them, you can plant them as close as 3 inches together. You never have to plant them more than 6 inches apart. And between rows, somewhere around 30 inches, 24 is a little bit too close, but 30 inches, 3 feet, and you'll be in good shape. Peppers are 18 to 24 inches between plants within a row, and 18 to 24 between rows. And tomatoes, because they get so big, I never plant my plants closer than 3 feet together within a row, and I always use at least 4 feet between rows, because otherwise you don't get the airflow and you can't get in there to pick the tomatoes. This particular link at the bottom will give you more information on proper vegetable gardening spacing. Trellis. You can buy trellis, you can make your own trellis, but things like cucumbers and tomatoes and pole beans and those kinds of things, grow them on a trellis. They save space, they help with airflow, and it makes them easier to pick. And it keeps some of the pests off of them that tend to run along the ground more than they do climb. So trellising is extremely important. I have a couple different sessions on different trellising techniques you can use, but it's not hard. And again, online you can find it in do-it-yourself instructions. But trellising is extremely important for vining plants and plants that grow tall and heavy, that need some additional support to keep the stalks or the limbs from breaking. Again, when you plant, use the seed packet. The seed packet is your friend. Plant them indoors when it says. If you're going to plant indoors, plant them outdoors when it says. Use your spacing within and between rows. Seed depth, all those things are extremely important to have successful harvest of the vegetables you plant. Row and hoe. Once you plant, and you got to keep the weeds down. You got to be on the lookout for any plants that might look like they have a disease. And a healthy plant is green. A healthy plant is not wilty. It's not discolored. So your eyes are your friends. And if you don't control disease and pests, some diseases will start in one part of a garden and just run havoc through your whole garden. And the same with pests. Pests can be, in this part of the neighborhoods, my enemies of squash bugs and vine borers more than anything else. But there are ways to notice that you have pests by looking at them, picking the leaves up, looking on the underneath, looking at the stem, looking for discoloration or some off color of your vegetables. Hoeing keeps the soil loose around your plants and makes water absorption by the soil greater than hard soil. So hoeing is important. And you're going to harvest as plants mature. And if you're going to do succession planting, you're going to need to plant all year long. Things like lettuce, you can get more than one harvest. There's a grow line. Lettuce and other leafy greens grow from the middle of the stalk out. So if you cut above that grow line where those little leaves are starting to form, you can eat the top and it'll grow more leaves for another harvest. And there are non-synthetic, non-harmful pests and herbicide mixes that you can do at home that will help control pests and disease. Keep in mind, you can help control pests, but it's extremely difficult to keep all pests out of your garden. If they're hungry, they're hungry. And then you're going to tend your garden. You've got your plants in, you're taking care of them. So you're going to keep them watered 1 to 2 inches below the surface. You're going to water on some consistent scheduled basis. You're going to weed, hoe, and fertilize as needed. And you're going to remove bugs and watch for disease. That's the tending of your garden. It doesn't take that long to walk through your garden every day and just take a look around. If it doesn't look out of the ordinary, it's probably okay. So just keep your eye on your garden for pests and disease and wilty plants or yellowing leaves, things that'll give you an indication that you got too little or too much water, or you might need to throw a little fertilizer on a plant because it's not growing that well, and that you have some bugs on your plant and they may be eating holes in it, or they could be laying eggs on it. And if they're laying eggs on it, the likelihood is when those eggs hatch, they will eat the leaves. When it's time to harvest, you harvest. If you're going to replant in that same place, then you should add some compost or organic fertilizer to that spot before and work it into the soil before you replant. And then you can either replant with the same crop or you can rotate to a different crop. And again, online, I have sessions that'll tell you about succession planting. I'll just give you an example. I live in the city and I use raised boxes mostly for planting. Plus, I don't like to row and hoe. I don't like to weed. I don't like to hoe. So raised boxes are a good option for me. So what I do is I have 4 foot by 4 foot boxes. Week 1, I plant that box with 4 leaf lettuce per square times 16 squares, 4 foot by 4 foot, 4 times 4, 16. So 4 times 16 is 64 leaf lettuce plants in a box. So I plant that box. The next week I plant another box. The next week I plant another box. The next week I plant another box, 64 each time. By the time I plant that 4th box, the first box is ready to harvest. So I harvest it, cut it off above the grow line. Second week, the second box, I do the same thing. The third week, I do the same thing in the third box. The 4th week, I do the same thing in the 4th box. Go back to the first box. I pull the plants, I plant more seed. That way I have lettuce all summer long, all spring and fall long, and enough. A box of lettuce 4 foot by 4 foot will feed a family of 4 and give you a couple 2 or 3 salads each a week. So succession planting works. You just have to understand the maturity date and plant succession plants so that you always have mature crop that you're harvesting all the time and replanting as you need to keep that cycle going. These are just some useful links and other sources that you can use to find out about gardening, about seeds, where you can buy them locally, and I even threw in my email address. But basically, garden's all about seeds or transplants, healthy soil, sun and water, and tending your garden once you've planted it. Start small, grow what you like to eat, and you're in good shape. That's all I have. Unless you have questions, I'll be happy to answer. Well,
all right. Alfred, thank you so much for your presentation. We do have some questions that came in during the presentation, as well as some questions that came in when people registered. So I'm going to share a few of those questions for you and give you an opportunity to answer them. So we're going to start with some of the questions that actually came in during your presentation. One is, what is the difference between organic seeds and regular seeds? Because you mentioned getting organic seeds.
Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. The difference, there's two kinds of seeds that I buy. Organic, because if you plant an organic seed, and I will also include heirloom seeds, heirloom and organic seeds, you can save the seeds and replant them, and you'll get the same characteristics for that plant as you got the year before. Hybrid seeds, you're not guaranteed that. They're a hybrid with different parents, and the second time you plant them, you might not get the same results as you did the year before. And then you have plants that are actually genetically modified in such a way as to resist diseases and other things that, in my opinion, hasn't had enough study yet to know the long-term effects of that. They've even got a killer gene in some seed that when you plant it, if you harvest the seeds and try to replant them the next year, they won't germinate. So I use organic and heirloom because I know that I'm going to get the same results next year as I got this year. So I save the seeds for my best, tastiest growing, and I replant them the next year. You're not guaranteed that with hybrids or genetically modified seed.
Another question was, are seeds and seed packets good? How long are seeds and seed packets good past their packing date?
Different seeds can be stored for different amounts of time. Most seeds you can harvest and plant or buy and keep at least a year, but some of them you can keep up to 3 or 4 years and get a good germination rate. You can even keep them longer than that, but maybe only 60, 70, 50% of the seeds will germinate. But there will come a time when those seeds won't germinate anymore. There's many lists on many places, and they're different for different seeds. The main thing about seeds is store them in such a way as they don't get moist and they're not in high heat or direct sunlight. You can throw them. I use vacuum sealed bags, and I put them in my vegetator in my refrigerator, and I take them out the next year and I use them. So humidity, heat, and direct sunlight will affect the life of your seed, but most things will last at least 1 year, and some much longer than that.
Another question is, in regards to Japanese beetles, do you have any suggestions on how to get rid of them in your garden?
I use I have a mixture that I use that helps deter most pests. I didn't say gets rid of them, but deters most pests. I take a gallon jug, and what I do is I take a cheesecloth, and you can either take fresh hot peppers or hot pepper seeds, and I put them in that cheesecloth and tie it up and drop it in that gallon jug. I also take a couple pieces of a garlic and I chop that up, put that in a cheesecloth, tie it up, drop that into the gallon jar. Then I fill that up with water and maybe eighth of a cup to a quarter of a cup of Murphy's oil soap, and I put that on the top. I tap it and I set it in the sun. And every day or two, I just flip it from the top to the bottom. And after about a week, that garlic, hot peppers, and Murphy's oil soap is all seeped into that water. I strain it into a spray bottle, and I spray my leaves, my stems, the underneath side of my leaves, and that will deter most pests, and it will not harm your plant. The only thing you have to keep in mind is you need to do that about every 2 weeks unless there's a heavy rain. The Murphy's oil soap helps keep that solution on the leaves. And the garlic and the hot peppers, definitely most pests do not like garlic. They do not like hot peppers, and will help keep them away.
Alfred, one of the most common questions that's coming up for people who are submitting them live, as well as those who submitted previous to the event when they signed up, is how do we prepare for cicadas this year in regards to our garden?
Cicadas are more damaging to trees than plants, although they will damage plants. About the only thing you can do is cover plants with a fine, cicadas are fairly large insects, a fine fabric mesh shade cloth, and only open the shade cloth at the ends to let air go through, because you do need air. It gets hot under there even with shade cloth. And you can lift the shade cloth off of the row cover or box cover that you use for a portion of the day, but definitely in the early morning and towards the end of the night, you want to cover it to try to keep them out, and that'll help. Cicadas are a pain in the butt, as all pests are, and if you don't keep them out by covering your plants when they're mostly around, then they'll get to them unless you use harmful insecticides, which I don't recommend. The solution I recommend will help keep them away. Cicadas don't like garlic or hot peppers either.
Alfred, another live question we had was, would you care to share advice on how to start seeds indoors? So planting the seeds and getting those starts started indoors. If you could give any advice on that.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this earlier. I might have lost it. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see it, Alfred.
This happens to be a 72 peat pellets. And that's what a peat pellet looks like. And what happens is when you put water on this will get about 7 times as big as it is now. And it's covered in a netting that dissolves, that is organic, and peat moss is peat is inorganic. So what I do is I put warm water in these. I put a hole in the middle and I drop my seed in, and then I pinch it closed. The whole trick to this is I can start 72 plants in here. Make sure you mark them so you don't forget which is which. And then what I do is after I've done that, I use this clear dome and I put it on top, and that gives it some extra humidity and helps them grow. Now you can use tray packs, you can use other techniques, but this is a very good technique. One of these 72 plants cost me $8. So it's really I don't have to worry about cleaning pots that I used from last year. I don't have to water them as much. Water, sun, not too much water, not too little, but moist and sunlight is extremely important. And obviously this will keep things like aphids, which can be an issue in a greenhouse, off of my plants.
Okay, for our next question, we're going to go to some of our previous our questions that were submitted when people registered. The first is, could you tell us about container gardening for those who don't have room for a row garden?
Container gardening is not a lot different than row and hoe, except you don't have to till or plow or hoe. You still have to weed and take care of your plants. The trick to container gardening, I use fabric bags when I container garden. You can use hard pots if you want. The trick to container gardening is making sure that the container is large enough, has enough cubic feet for the plant you're growing. So I never grow in a container that's any less than 1 foot wide and 1 foot long, and at least a foot deep, preferably 18 inches. 1 by 1 by 1 is the least I would use. That would be for something like lettuce. If I was going to grow tomatoes, I would probably use a 2 by 2 by 2 for tomatoes. So the biggest thing about container gardening is the soil is different. You don't want to use something that when it rains, it'll puddle. So use a good container soil, and the container has to be large enough to accommodate the roots of the plant as it grows. So if it gets root bound, it's not going to grow that well.
For those who have additional questions on container gardening, Alfred does have a presentation on it, and we will share that presentation with everyone who registered after the fact. So you will have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about that as well. There's some other questions that have come up that we'll send that out to everyone as well for their viewing. The next question is when and how do you plant carrots from seed in New Jersey?
New Jersey's no different than Ohio. Things like carrots, radishes, scallions, things like that can be planted as soon as the ground is workable. You don't have to wait for the last frost for things like that. Early season, late season crops, if you Google it, it'll tell you all the crops you could plant before the last frost, all the things that'll even stand a slight frost at the end of the year. Carrots, obviously, if you're growing an 18-inch carrot, it's different than a 6-inch carrot. But carrots, the big thing you have to remember about carrots is you need at least 2 or 3 inches between each plant. Plant them as soon as the ground is workable. Plant them in September for a late fall, early winter. It takes about 60 days for a carrot to mature. The trick is I buy pelleted carrot seeds because I can get 1 in each hole. If you use regular carrot seeds, then you're going to have to thin more. If you do not thin your carrots to 1 plant per every 2 or 3 inches, they will not grow carrots. So thinning is extremely important, but you can plant them before the last frost or even up until 3 weeks before the first frost of the fall.
I will tell everyone we have 4 minutes left in the presentation time. However, we are going to continue answering a few more questions, so we'll go beyond that 1 o'clock time frame. If you have to go, we completely understand and welcome you to return later to see some of the additional questions if you're interested. This video will be hosted on YouTube, and you'll be able to access the recorded video after the fact. So
yeah, I don't mind answering questions on if you do Facebook, Alfred's Gardening Tips, or my email. I have presentations for just about anything. that you can think of from a gardening perspective that I've done over the last 10 years, then I'm always available to try to help in any way I can. It doesn't bother me. You're not bothering me if you ask me a question at all.
So if you follow Alfred on Alfred's Gardening Tips on Facebook, he'll be able to answer some additional questions on there. He will also be available to share his email with you, so he'll be able to answer questions by email as well. So we are going to take a few more questions. We will go beyond that 1 o'clock time frame, but if you have to go, we completely understand and encourage you to come back and check out the rest of the questions, or even reach out to Alfred yourself and ask some questions that didn't get touched on. Sorry we couldn't get to every question, but we're going to work on working through what we can. Our next question is, what vegetables grow well together in a planter? This particular person has a 12-gallon planter box on their deck. And conversely, what plants do not grow well together? And I'll hand it back over to Alfred to answer that question.
Okay, my recommendation is either borrow it from the library or buy it, a book called Carrots Love Tomatoes that talks all about companion planting, and it tells you what grows well together and what doesn't grow well together. For instance, garlic with cucumbers is good to grow. Not garlic, dill. Dill with cucumbers is good to grow. Nasturtiums is good with cucumbers to grow because both deter cucumber beetles. Basil and tomatoes, carrots and tomatoes. So there's a lot of things you can grow together according to the space that each one is going to take up individually in your container. And there's some things that you shouldn't grow. To nightshades, you don't grow nightshades, different nightshades together. If you think about it, one thing is, I'll give you a real quickie here. Three Sisters Garden is a concept where you use a 10 by 10 space and you put 9 mounds in it. And in each of those mounds, you have a foot in between each mound. In those mounds, you plant 3 or 4 corn seed. So 9 times 4 is 36 corn in that 10 by 10 space. When the corn gets about a foot or foot and a half tall, you can plant a couple pole beans around each one of those corn stalks. So let's say you do 2, you got 4, 8 times 9 is 72 pole bean plants. Corn takes nitrogen out of the soil. Beans puts nitrogen into the soil. The beans grow up the corn stalk, so the corn stalk gives them a place to grow up, a trellis, if you will. And then in between the mounds, you can plant pumpkin or squash, which are big leafed plants, which will shade the ground and keep moisture in better, as well as suppress weeds and grass. And the other thing it does for you is if you've ever seen a squirrel or a rabbit or any other thing eat, it gets up on its hind legs and its head's swiveling all the time because it's looking for something that's going to eat it. Those big broad leaves tend to be a place they don't like to be because they can't see over them. So companion planting corn, beans, and squash or pumpkin together is a good alternative in a 10 by 10 space that'll give you zucchini or pumpkin, corn, and beans, and you're replenishing the soil. So you're doing your crop rotation in real time in that one spot.
Another question that came up, Alfred, is we've had questions about bug pests like cicadas and Japanese beetles. But one question, several questions that have come up is how to handle, I guess I would say, mammalian pests. So one that came up was how to handle deers getting in your garden. Another one that came up is how to handle squirrels. So can you, we talked about some of those smaller pests. Can you talk about some of the bigger pests like squirrels and deer and how to keep them out of your garden?
Yeah. Deer will jump over a 6-8 foot fence. So you can't really fence them out. So the trick with deer don't like to feel like they're confined. So if you got a 10 by 20 garden and it's fenced off, the likelihood of the deer will jump over the fence into the garden, but when it's in the garden, it won't feel comfortable because it doesn't have the room it needs to jump back out. So one trick is to keep your area smaller and put up a fence so that things like deer, big animals don't like to get in it. When you put your fence up, it's always a good idea to take chicken wire and for about a foot on each side of the fence, lay that chicken wire on the ground before you put your fence up. That way, digging animals like raccoons or skunks, when they go to dig underneath the fence, they don't dig and then dig 3 feet into your garden. They usually dig from one side of the fence and try to come right out the other. You're having that chicken wire on the ground, laying on the ground, a foot and a half or 2 on each side of your fence. It'll help keep digging animals out. And then lastly, if you look up online, there's something called a critter cage that'll help a lot with squirrels and deers and birds, where it's actually a cage like a lid on a pot, a dome on a pot that's made out of chicken wire that has a handle that you can actually water through. And then when you're ready to harvest, you just pick it up and set it to the side, and then you go inside and harvest, and then you put it back on. It's called a critter cage. If you look up online, it's a simple wooden frame with chicken wire that's as tall as your tallest plant in that garden plot's going to be. So if you're going to grow something 2 feet wide, it's a 4 foot by 4 foot frame. If you put 8 feet, 2 feet on each side of the 4 foot frame on a side of a cross, bring the sides up, zip tie them together, you've got a cage. Cut off the chicken wire where the frame was, you can lift it and put it on. Now, I know you didn't understand that, but if you look at it online, it's a good way. It's a good way to keep squirrels and birds and rabbits out of your garden. Critter cage.
We'll do a few more questions, one of which we have a few questions about raised container gardening. And one of the questions that came up is, what is the best raised garden frame to use?
I jokingly say free wood. Free wood is always good. Anything free is good. You can make a raised box out of anything you want. Fence slats. You can buy a 6 foot long fence slat that's 3/4 of an inch thick. It's made out of cedar for under $2. So 4 of those will give you a 4 foot by 4 foot box, 16 square feet. And the pieces you cut off, you can actually make a 2 foot by 2 foot box out of. You can do them out of cinder blocks. You can do them out of logs. You can do them out of rocks, anything you want. You can even use a treated wood, because most treated wood is not treated with arsenic anymore. But if you're leery of that, you can just get regular wood and treat it with linseed oil. Linseed oil is a natural preservative to wood that'll help it last longer.
One of the other questions about container gardening was, do you want to change the soil from year to year in a container garden? Or
I use a mix of peat moss, coarse grade agricultural vermiculite, and manure. I'm going to use a 4 foot by 4 foot box as an example that is 6 inches deep. 4 foot by 4 foot is 16 square feet. It's 6 inches deep, which will grow any annual you want to grow other than a 10-inch carrot. So 16 divided by a half a foot gives you 8 cubic feet. So it's going to take 8 cubic feet of soil to fill that up. So I use 3 cubic feet of peat moss, 3 cubic feet of vermiculite, and 3 cubic feet of manure. Mix it all together, and that's what I fill that box up with. The peat moss is for moisture retention. The plant doesn't eat that. Vermiculite is a rock. The plant doesn't eat that. The only thing the plant's going to use is the manure or compost you put in. So you do not have to change the soil. The only thing you have to do is whatever might get washed off in a heavy rain, it might settle a little bit once you first put it in, or what comes out with the roots when you pull the roots out. The rest of it, the peat moss and vermiculite, the plant hasn't used it. Just put enough compost or put enough manure in that box, to fill it back up, and you're good to go. Because the plant doesn't use the vermiculite. The plant doesn't use the peat moss. It's only using the organic material to grow. So that's what you have to replace. Same vermiculite, same peat moss will be there 20 years from now, except for what got washed off or what came out with the roots you pulled.
Alfred, one of the questions is regarding to tilling. So the question that came up is they're experimenting with no-till gardening, and they want to know, what are your tips for a successful garden without excessive tilling?
If you put down cardboard and wet it real well, you can put a mixture of soil, leaf mold, organic material on top of that cardboard and grow right in it. The cardboard will break down. You should be okay. So what I would usually do is let's say I'm going to do a 10 by 20 garden. Put down cardboard, wet it, throw my material I'm going to grow on top, give it about a 3 or 4 inch covering of that, and that cardboard will break down. The roots will go through the cardboard, voila. You can also use newspaper for the same reason. Most newspaper now does not have any harmful material in it, as long as you use black and white print. Put down a layer, wet it. Put down another layer, wet it. Put down another layer, wet it. Do the same thing. Put what you're going to grow in, manure, compost, soil, leaf mold, on top of that, and grow right in it, and you'll be fine.
Thank you, Alfred. We have another question. And the question is, for those who have limited space, what would be your suggestion for starting gardening?
It's according to the kind of look you're looking for. A 2 foot by 4 foot straw bale, you can grow tomatoes in, you can grow lots of different things in. So if you're not worried about aesthetics, you can grow in a straw bale. Look it up online. It's easy to do, and it's a good way to technique. Containers are good. Raised boxes are good. The least expensive, a pallet. You can grow in a pallet if you cover it with a landscape cloth, except for the side you're going to grow in. You can grow in a wooden pallet, as long as when you look at the squares on the ends of the wooden pallet, if there's a HT, that means it was heat treated, not chemically treated. You can wrap that sucker in landscape cloth, fill it with good soil, and grow right between the lats on top if you're growing something small, or turn it over and put the 4 big holes up top and grow tomatoes in it. So there's a lot of different ways. Pallets, straw bales, containers, raised boxes. There's all kinds of ways. You can even hang an old shoe, the canvas shoe holders that go on the back of a door that people put their shoes in. Fill them up with a good potting soil. You can grow small herbs and greens hanging on a fence. So there's lots of different ways.
Alfred, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to end our session for the day. And the next question is what are some ways that at-home gardeners can test their soil to find out what they need to do for optimal growth?
Couple of things. If you've lived in a spot for 5 years, unless there's something like lead or mercury or asbestos or something in that soil is going to be good to grow in. It's only those kinds of things you have to worry about. If you want to get it tested, you can send it away for a test, and they can tell you all the trace minerals and all that good stuff. But if you've lived there long enough, then you know the soil is clean. The pH, you can check. There's a simple test you can do at home where you take dirt and you put common materials in it, shake it up, and it'll tell you what your pH is. And then you usually use sulfur or lime if it's way above 7.5 or way below 6.5. And you'll be fine. The other way is to grow in a raised box and put landscape cloth so that the roots can't get down into the soil, and fill it up with a good soil, and you know it's good soil. So those are some recommendations I would make.
All right, that was our last question of the day. So I want to give out a few thank yous and a bit of information. So number one, I want to thank you, Alfred, for joining us today and speaking and sharing so much wonderful knowledge and answering so many questions. I want to thank the Miami University Alumni Association for partnering with us on this event and providing the wonderful program to host this on. I also want to again remind everyone, if your question did not get answered by Alfred, or you have additional questions, Alfred is open to answering those questions either on Facebook at Alfred's Gardening Tips, or when we send a follow-up email, we will include his email. And he said you are more than welcome to send him a question, and he will answer it. And I also want to thank all of you for attending today. You're the reason that we do this. We're here to engage alumni and provide meaningful opportunities for growth and engagement. And you guys make this event. So thank you for coming. And we look forward to having you join us at our next event as part of our Spring Life Hack series. So thanks and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.